Hi everybody, welcome to another Chats with Chaudhry, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Hedley Rees, who is managing consultant of PharmaFlow Ltd and also an author of a number of books within pharma, including obviously Taming the Big Pharma Monster, and also a native speaker at exhibitions and events. So Hedley, lovely to meet you. How are you?
I'm really good, Ridwan. Yeah, nice to speak to you today. So, I'm happy to share my thoughts with you.
Fantastic. Well, before we start talking about some of the books and your thoughts on pharma and so on, I think it would be useful for viewers to get an idea of your background, just so they know where you're coming from in terms of your experience.
Yeah, sure. Well, I trained as a production stroke industrial engineer outside of the pharma sector in fast-moving consumer goods, automotives, etc. So I sort of grew up thinking in terms of modern production systems. I joined the pharma industry in 1980, which was the year before the start of the blockbuster era. I joined Bayer in the UK, and we were then shipping goods globally, a manufacturing and packaging plant. One of the products we used to supply was Alka-Seltzer to most of Europe. We also used to make sterile injectables and the whole range of other ethical pharmaceuticals and diagnostics. I left there in 1996 after 16 really fantastic years, and I joined the biotech industry. And then I got to know about early stage drug development, things like toxicology, DMPK, molecular modeling, and working with outsourced supply chains, because in those days biotech companies, venture capital funded, didn't have the resources to run their own facilities. So again, I spent 10 happy years working for a number of high profile biotech companies. I helped launch Tarceva in the US in partnership with Genentech in 2004, 2005. Tarceva being a drug for non-small cell lung cancer. That was so successful that they made me redundant, because all the supply chain management stuff moved to the US, and I wasn't of a mind to my time of life then to go out and start a new life out there. So I became an independent consultant, and I've been that ever since. And I quite soon realized that most biotech, emerging companies' heart isn't in supply chain management. So I found it quite difficult to get any work as an independent consultant. So I've sort of spent the rest of my time trying to make the case for strategic management of the supply chain as the route to success in pharma, right, not molecular compounds with patents behind them. So, and here I am talking to you today.
All right. So is that what led you to write your book, Taming the Big Pharma Monster, then? That issue is that obviously a lot of farmers always talking about patents rather than sort of looking at the whole issue around supply chain.
Yeah, well, I suppose I wrote Taming the Big Pharma Monster out of frustration, because I wrote supply chain management in the drug industry for Wiley in 2011 after the editor of Pharmaceutical Sciences asked me if I wanted to write a book. I wrote everything I ever knew in the book, and I had 30 expert witnesses in there with me writing their views of particular elements of the industry and the supply chain. And in the final chapter, I explained how disconnected the industry had become in the supply chain. If they're not connected and joined up, then they are fatally flawed potentially. And since 2011 to date, pharma supply chains are probably the most disconnected, convoluted, globe-spanning supply chain anyone has ever known. And with the autologous patient-specific therapies, it's about to get even worse. So, Taming the Big Pharma Monster, I explained how we've got to where we are today, where big pharma companies, really their business model is dependent on patented molecular compounds and using sales and marketing leverage to extract maximum benefit, which I see as a short-term strategy, whereas focusing on patients and healthcare professionals, the people who use the products, that is a sustainable long-term strategy. that the industry needs to adopt. I try and be as nice about it as I can by explaining it and making it in very simple terms. But and I hope I haven't made too many enemies along the way. But there you go.
Well, I mean, you also use the term taking medicines back to the future. What do you mean by that?
Well, as I researched the book, I hit upon an article by a gentleman called Bob Gaines, who wrote Germ Theory. He wrote it in 2017. It was the real story on penicillin,
Right.
which showed that actually, whilst Fleming made an accidental finding, he didn't have a clue what was in that mold that was killing bacteria. And it took 12 years before he eventually got Oxford University interested, and they isolated the active ingredient for him. But they could only make enough to run small-scale animal and clinical trials, and they had just enough material to prove penicillin was actually working, but they didn't know how to make anything other than gram quantities. So they flew over to the US and they spoke to the forerunner to the US FDA, the US Department of Agriculture, to a guy called Andrew J. Moyer, and he was an expert in mold manufacture, and he devised a process that increased the yield exponentially for penicillin, and it was only when he did that that the quantities could be made to meet the demand from World War II. The process was handed over to Merck and few of the other pharma companies, and they started to make the quantities. But actually, it was a huge collaboration between government, between pharma companies, and most importantly, I think, the manufacturing people who put the supply chain together. And without that, doesn't matter how good the science is, you're not going to make any revenues and you're not going to make any profits. So that's the message, that in the days of penicillin, 1928 to 1948, when the patent was finally awarded to Moyer, if you look at the polio vaccine, Jonas Salk, he was a physician, Fleming was a physician. Salk said, I'm not going to patent this, could you patent the son? The guys who brought insulin to market, Banting and his friends, they were physicians. They actually, as did Salk, they actually tested the insulin on themselves to make sure it was safe. And they sold the patent for $1 each, $3. And now we know in the US, insulin is all but unaffordable for many, many people. And there's huge back pressure for change. So why I say taking medicines back to the future, if you go back to the post-blockbuster era, the sort of up to the early 1970s, drug development was with healthcare professionals were at the heart of drug development.
Right.
They were the ones linked to the patients, and they were the ones actually leading the development of medicines.
Well, that leads up quite nicely to what's happening right now. And do you think then that this whole thing now, which is happening with COVID, obviously this race for a vaccine and so on, that we are eventually going to get back to that situation pre-70s where there is more collaboration and people are working closer together in terms of development and the supply chain and bringing things out in the marketplace?
Yeah, that's a good point, Richard. The opportunity is there, but all the signs are it's not being taken up. But I haven't checked in the last couple of days how many companies are now developing a vaccine. It was 120 the last time I
think it's higher than that.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it's higher than that. But why would you want any more than one company to have a vaccine? You know, one vaccine. That's it. It's not like cars or planes where you want different models or whatever. You just want a vaccine that works. So you have to ask yourself a question: why there is all this competition? And I just look at some of the programs, the development programs. They must be, and I may have posted this on LinkedIn or Twitter today. The pace is at least 100 times greater than any development program has ever been in the world of medicine. To be planning phase 3 clinical trials when you don't even have safety data from the phase 1 study available, you have to think, where's the sense in that? You know, safety data has to be long-term. You know, if we're going to put billions of doses into patients, we need to be sure that not one of those patients are going to be at risk of any adverse events, let alone serious adverse events and death. And the mRNA vaccines, which most of them are, they've done the development for over 25 years, and one has never come to market. So there's no regulatory track record of approving these vaccines. Who would deny, who would say, gosh, we would love a vaccine? But when you go to your doctor and you say, I've got a virus, he'll say, well, go to bed, wrap up warm, drink hot fluids, and your body will fight it off. That's never been for the virus. So I think the good thing from this is that people realize that medicines don't suddenly pop up onto the pharmacy shelf from nowhere. They have to be made. Lead times are involved. Skilled people have to apply their efforts diligently, and you know, it's hard work. It's blood, sweat, and tears. And this notion that a scientific idea can suddenly bring in billions of dollars, you know, needs to be put in the trash can, or the bin as we call it over here. And we should start again working closely with healthcare professionals and patient groups, patient advocacy. I don't know if I mentioned, but I hosted a conference last year in Cardiff in Wales, about 60 people, and we wrote a white paper that's now gone to the Health and Social Care Committee at the House of Commons. It's been acknowledged of receipt by Jeremy Hunt, the former, now chairman of the Health and Social Care Committee, and by the Secretariat. And we've asked for an inquiry into patent law to review the balance of risk and reward with patents. If you put a lot of work into a product, you deserve a patent. You know, you should get the commercial returns. But if you have actually not done any work in understanding the potential of your product to get to market, then you should be incentivized to do that work before you get a patent. And that's not just myself, but there are a large increasing body of people now who are saying, you know, the world is not benefiting by the way the patent system is operating. And there are many countries actually reviewing patent law, and the more of that we do, the better.
Well, this leads up actually to my next question. Was you've got a webinar coming up, haven't you? In the
yes, yeah, 28th of July. Thanks for the plug. But 4 o'clock British Standard Time. And what I'm trying to explain is that through the pandemic, through COVID, is that strategic supply chain management is the set of competencies that the industry needs to be able to develop fit-for-purpose products. So you need to first engage with your end users of your products, particularly your healthcare professionals, in the same way in aviation, plane developers engage with pilots, and you know, people who will be traveling in planes, passengers. But in the main, passengers assume the plane is safe because they know the pilots have done the work. It should be the same in medicine. Patients should feel their medicines are safe and effective because healthcare professionals have done the work in making sure they are. So that engagement, then you need then to put in from that engagement with the healthcare professional, develop a voice of the end user, where you know the indication, you know where it's going to be used, you know the profile of the patients, you know all this information, and then you build the supply chain to deliver on what's needed, and you involve all the right parties, the procurement skills, transport, distribution skills, system skills. All those skills need to be brought to bear to bring products to market. Unless we do that, I think the whole industry is doomed to progressively going further and further downhill.
Right, well, that sounds very, very interesting. And if anybody would like to register for that webinar, there will be details above this video with a link straight through to it, so you can do that. Well, Hedley, I've sort of run out of questions unless there's any hot topic that you want to sort of highlight before we close, or anything you've seen in the news this week that you think, well, actually is worth sharing with everybody. Have you got anything?
No, the only thing I would say is that one of the things that came out of our white paper was that education is fundamental to the daily briefing, if you like. The amount of confusion and lack of understanding of viruses, of epidemiology, of all these different aspects, where people suddenly believe that there's a magic cure for the vaccine suddenly going to pop up. People need to understand the facts, and in a very simple way. And that's the latest project that I'm working on, is developing education programs that can drive change into the future in the right way and have a long-term effect. So I've got that all out of my system now, Rizwan, so thank you for that.
Well, actually, Eddie, I think you're right. Education on so many levels is important for society, and ignorance is actually not bliss, as you'd say. I think people do need to be better informed. So, all I can say is thank you very much for taking time out, Hedley, to talk to me about this. It's been really interesting. I hope everybody who's watched this has found it useful and interesting. Hedley's webinar, as I said, you can find out more by registering on the link above the video. And if you've got any comments about what Hedley said, you agree or disagree, feel free to put some comments in the comments box below, or message Hedley directly. I'm sure we'll be delighted to hear from you and be happy to have that conversation. And until next time, as I always say, stay well and stay safe. Hedley, once again, thank you very much for your time, mate. I appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity, Rizwan. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.